The laughter stopped forever. By morning, their trays were gone, and the routine continued as if nothing had happened. What changed wasn't the food. The reassignment order arrived, folded inside a standard medical inventory sheet. No explanation, no greeting, just a new location code, a reporting time, and a handwritten note in the margin: temporary nutritional oversight. The doctor had not requested the transfer. No one had asked if she was available. Her previous duties were already marked as reassigned. She had 6 hours to report. At the bottom of the page was a clerical detail that felt strangely out of place. 3 identical carbon copies had already been stamped and filed before she even saw the order. Someone had processed her acceptance. The transport schedule was attached. There was only one departure that day. Refusal wasn't mentioned anywhere. In the corridor outside the administrative office, 2 other staff members were reading identical envelopes. Neither spoke. One folded hers immediately and walked toward the loading area without hesitation. The new assignment category was listed as routine adjustment monitoring, but the reporting deadline was written in red. And next to the time, a small notation had been added: delay not recommended. The transport stopped without announcement. No one explained where they were. The building looked temporary, but the locks were not. The air inside carried the flat smell of storage, not care. A clipboard waited on a desk, already filled in, already signed, just missing her initials. The unease began with the feeling that she was late to something already in progress. No briefing was given. No supervisor appeared. Instead, supplies were arranged in exact quantities, labeled with dates she didn't recognize. The portions were measured, weighed, recorded, but no instructions explained why the amounts were so precise. The unease deepened when she realized the measurements mattered more than the people receiving them. Other staff moved through the space quickly, efficiently, silently. When paths crossed, their eyes shifted away before contact could happen. One worker adjusted a scale without looking up. Another replaced a tray and immediately walked out of the room. The unease sharpened when silence started to feel coordinated. The facility had sounds: metal trays, distant doors, footsteps, but no voices. Even the prisoners spoke in low tones that never carried beyond their tables. The laughter from earlier arrivals had already faded into short exchanges, then into nothing. The unease settled when the quiet began to feel intentional. She checked a supply list twice, then asked a nearby clerk if the portion records were correct. The clerk didn't answer. Instead, he made a small note on the edge of her paperwork and slid it back without comment. The unease became something else when she understood the question had been recorded. And that wasn't the first thing that disappeared. For the first few days, the routine felt mechanical. Meals arrived at the same minute. Trays were aligned. Portions measured. Numbers confirmed. The predictability was the only stable thing in the building. Then one morning, the delivery came early. Not by much, 5 minutes, maybe less. But the staff log still showed the original time. No correction was made. The next day, the delivery was late. No explanation. The prisoners noticed. Their movement slowed, watching the doors instead of their trays. That evening, a sound everyone had grown used to: the metal cart rolling down the hallway, never came. Meals were already inside. Pre-positioned. No one had seen them arrive. The scale used to verify portions was removed from the table. No announcement, no replacement. From then on, portions were handed out from sealed containers labeled only with numbers. Not weights. Numbers. At one table, a small group reacted the way they had when they first arrived: quiet jokes, a few brief laughs. It didn't last long. At the next meal, their table received trays without utensils. No one corrected the mistake. And the following morning, one of the seats at that table was empty. The rest of the portions were distributed normally. The logbook showed the same total count as the day before. That wasn't the first thing that stopped matching. Time began to feel uneven. Shifts overlapped without notice. Staff arrived to find someone already working their station or no one there at all. The official schedule remained unchanged. Meal counts were adjusted frequently, but never rewritten. Instead, small correction marks appeared in the margins. No initials. No dates. Supply requests started arriving before the shortages happened. Boxes labeled for reduced portions were delivered days before any reduction order appeared. When the doctor compared intake numbers across 3 consecutive days, the totals dropped. Then rose. Then dropped again. But the number of occupied seats had only gone down. She searched for earlier records to check the pattern. Several pages were missing. Not torn. Removed cleanly along the binding. When she reported the gap, the records office sent a replacement binder the next morning. It began 3 days later than the original. Those 3 days no longer existed. Staff conversations changed too. People stopped saying how many. They started saying what's listed. One evening, a clerk counted the trays twice. The second number was lower. He crossed out the first count. No one asked which one was correct. Because what mattered wasn't what was there. It was what remained on paper. And once something disappeared from the record, it didn't come back. The shift that changed everything didn't look different. No alarms. No orders. No raised voices. During evening distribution, the prisoners were directed into 2 lines instead of 1. No explanation. One woman stepped into the wrong line. She hesitated when she noticed the others watching. The guard didn't speak. Just waited. The woman moved herself into the other line. The count was adjusted without comment. Later that night, the doctor reviewed the nutrition chart. The minimum daily threshold had been lowered. Only slightly. A difference small enough to go unnoticed during a normal check. There was no memo announcing the change. The next morning, the new number was already printed on updated forms. No one mentioned the old one again. By the end of the week, staff behavior had shifted in subtle ways. People stopped double-checking calculations. Stopped comparing numbers between shifts. Stopped asking when totals didn't match. During one roster review, a clerk paused. His finger hovered over a name that wasn't there anymore. He moved his hand down the page. Continued reading. No correction was made. At the next meal, the tray count matched the new roster. Not the memory of the previous day. And for the first time, the doctor noticed something else. No one was waiting for confirmation anymore. The adjustments happened first. The paperwork followed. Then the routine continued. By then, the system didn't need instructions. Because everyone already knew what not to question. And that was the moment it became locked. Not when something changed, but when no one expected it to change back. The reassignment ended without notice. There was no closing meeting. No transfer briefing. Just a short message placed inside her outgoing file. Rotation complete. Return to previous duties. Her name reappeared on the old schedule the following week, exactly where it had been before. No gap. No interruption. No reference to where she had been. It was as if the assignment had never existed. When she requested her field records for transfer, the administrative office returned a thinner folder than expected. Several dates were missing. Not flagged, not marked as incomplete. Simply absent. When she pointed it out, the clerk checked a master index and gave a routine explanation. Temporary operations are often consolidated. Individual logs aren't always retained. The explanation sounded practiced. The missing dates covered the period when the portion thresholds had been lowered. Those days no longer had detailed records. One document was missing entirely: the original intake summary. It had contained the starting population numbers, nutritional baselines, and initial medical observations. The clerk searched twice. Then a replacement copy appeared 2 days later. Typed. The numbers were lower than she remembered. When she asked if the original handwritten version could be located, the clerk shook his head. Typed copies are considered official. The new document carried a fresh approval stamp, dated weeks after the intake period. Procedures had changed too. New policy sheets were distributed across multiple facilities. From that point forward, daily portion tracking was no longer required. Only weekly totals. No individual measurements. No daily comparisons. No fluctuation records. When she asked when the policy had been updated, the answer came without hesitation. This has been standard for some time. There was no prior version attached. No revision date. No indication that anything had changed. She contacted 2 other staff members who had worked the same rotation. Their responses were careful. General. They spoke about temporary shortages, supply adjustments, routine consolidation. None of them mentioned numbers. None of them mentioned missing days. And none of them asked what she remembered. Not out of fear. Out of habit. Because details had already been trained out of the conversation. Months later, she tried to locate the facility in the regional directory. It was listed under temporary operations. Status closed. No closure date. No final report. No transfer summary. The operational code had been reassigned to a different location. The original site no longer appeared in active or archived listings. When she reviewed her own personnel file, the rotation was recorded in a single line. Support assignment duration, short term. No location name. No operational category. No duties listed. Even the transportation request had been removed. Only the reimbursement receipt remained. The most unsettling change came later. New training materials began emphasizing efficiency in documentation. Record what is required. Avoid unnecessary detail. Use approved summaries. One line appeared repeatedly. Excess documentation creates inconsistency. And beneath it, consistency ensures operational clarity. Weeks turned into months. The missing days stopped feeling missing. The altered numbers stopped feeling altered. Because every official document now agreed with every other official document. There was nothing left to contradict the record. And once the record was complete, so was the forgetting. That wasn't when the system erased what happened. That was when it made sure nothing else could prove it had ever been different. Years later, the habits remained. The doctor still measured portions more precisely than required. Even when the forms only asked for weekly totals. Even when no one reviewed the numbers closely. She weighed. She recalculated. She checked again. Not because the system demanded accuracy. Because once small differences had changed outcomes. And no one had said when the limits moved. In meetings, she noticed how quickly procedures were accepted. A new form. A revised threshold. A simplified process. Someone would ask if the change had always been in place. Someone else would say yes. And the conversation would move on. No one looked for the previous version, because the newest document was always treated as the truth. Occasionally, a name from that rotation would surface in her memory. Not clearly, just a face at a table, a seat that had been filled, a number that had once been higher. She tried once to match those memories to the official records. The totals aligned perfectly. There were no gaps. That was what unsettled her most. Not that something had disappeared, but that the paperwork showed nothing missing. Over time, the experience stopped feeling like an event. It felt like a process. Small adjustments, routine approvals, minor efficiencies. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. Just quiet changes that no one questioned long enough to resist. She never spoke about it directly. When younger staff asked about field rotations, she kept her answers practical. Follow the forms. Check the numbers. Document what you see. And if something feels different, write it down before the form changes. Years later, during a routine audit, a supervisor reviewed her work and paused. "You record more detail than necessary," he said. "It isn't required anymore." She nodded, but she didn't change the way she documented, because she had seen what happened when detail became optional. The system never issued a harmful order. It never demanded cruelty. It never announced a decision that crossed a line. It only adjusted measurements, updated forms, removed what wasn't required, and continued forward. What stayed with her wasn't what had been done. It was how normal it had felt while it was happening. How each change had seemed too small to challenge. How the routine had made every decision feel temporary. And how temporary decisions had quietly become permanent. Because systems don't change all at once. They change one form at a time. One number at a time. One silence at a time. And by the time anyone realizes what those changes meant, the records are already complete. The routine is already accepted. And the questions no longer fit the paperwork. If nothing ever feels like a clear order, and every step looks routine, at what point does following the process become choosing not to see?